I'm grateful for everybody coming out this morning and here in interacting with Jacob Atkin as one of our candidates for the CFO, Vice President of Finance position. Jacob is one of our internal candidates, and so many of us know him already. I'm actually going to leave him time to introduce himself. This morning's session will be about 40 minutes, give or take, of Jacob's presentation, both providing an introduction to himself as well as answering some questions that the search committee has given him. And then we'll leave the remaining 20 minutes for question and answer. So at this point, I would like to turn the time over to Jacob. Let's give him a hand for showing up today. Very much appreciate it.
Well, it's lovely to be here with you this morning. On the bright side, I think I know every single person's name in this room. So it's nice to be together with friends. We'll get through the boring stuff first. I actually started at the institution in 2004 as the junior accountant in the McKay Event Center. Maybe the most fun I've had as a UV employee. But that didn't last too long. I moved into the manager for departmental accounting, then the director of internal audit. That was maybe the most exciting at times. We actually discovered some pretty significant fraud, and I ended up being called as a witness in a criminal trial against former employees for the institution. And so, certainly exciting to go through that. And obviously, I'm currently serving as the AVP for Finance and Grema, and have been doing so for the last 6 years. I got a bachelor's degree in accounting from UVU. Thank you. I actually started as an electrical engineering major. I got the presidential scholarship at UVU, and so I got my associate's degree in pre-engineering. At the time, we did not have engineering at the university. Transferred to BYU and spent about 6 weeks living in the Clyde building on campus at BYU, and I hated every second of it. Decided that I am not smart enough or strange enough to actually be an electrical engineering major for the rest of my life. And I came up with the brilliant idea of becoming an attorney. Equally stupid idea, by the way. So I considered criminal justice, thinking I might want to do criminal law. My bishop at the time was a prosecuting attorney for Orem City, and I respected him a lot. Thought I could do that, fight for peace and justice. Or maybe I'd go into business law. So I decided to get accounting because I thought it was a far more practical degree than criminal justice. And I transferred back to UVU because I loved my time at the institution so much as a freshman and sophomore. And my first accounting class, 2010, unlike any of my engineering courses, seemed like it was being taught in my native language, right? I got it, right? It clicked. Everything made so much sense that as I worked my way through accounting, I shifted and I decided, okay, I still want to be an attorney because I didn't know many attorneys at the time. And so I decided I was going to become a tax attorney. And there's kind of two pathways, right? You can get a law degree and then an additional degree from a law school in taxation, or you can get a business degree in taxation, and they're relatively equivalent. The advantage of getting a business degree in taxation is I could get my CPA license and practice and work, try and continue to support a family, which was growing at the time, while getting through law school. Fortunately, after I finished getting my master's degree, I was still working at the university at the time. I got my CPA license. I became the director of internal audit. And frankly, I've never looked back. I have no desire to go to law school now. Not that I dislike any of the attorneys that work here on campus. I just dislike having to work with the attorneys here on campus. So, on a personal note, I was born August 1st. I'm a Leo. And apparently, I'm a bit haughty, but you all love me despite that. When Linda announced that she was going to retire, I immediately thought, how can I ingratiate myself better with campus faculty? So I called my old friend, Fred White, and asked him, right, I need an easy win here. What can I do? And obviously, his advice was, grow a beard. Now, many of you have known me for a lot of years. This is the first time ever that I have grown a beard. But if you know Fred White, you understand why that might be the first piece of advice that he gave. Now, he might have wanted me to grow out my hair, dye it gray, I don't know. But I did decide to follow his advice and grow a beard. Actually, over spring break, I decided not to shave. And my facial hair grows pretty fast. My wife really liked it, so we decided to keep at it. And now she actually prefers this look. So I may be sporting a beard for some time going forward. I do want to talk about my family. Being here since 2004, my son on the left was 2 at the time. My wife was pregnant with our third. My oldest daughter was 4. My family, my kids, they've grown up on campus, right? UVU is a part of our family culture. It's a part of who we are. My oldest 2 children both went to UCAS. They both graduated high school with associate's degrees at UVU. And that's an interesting experience. My oldest daughter, the one on the right, she was 17 as a senior in high school. And, at UCAS as a senior, all of your classes are just part of the regular curriculum. So she was here on campus taking classes, with a bunch of 21-year-old returned missionaries. Not my favorite thing in the world, but fortunately, she doesn't like to date, and so it was never a problem. Now, the daughter next to her, she loves to date. That would have been a huge problem for me, but she decided to stay at Salem Hills. But we really love UVU as a family. And one of our favorite things to do has been to come and to exercise together in the Student Life and Wellness Center. My son, before starting to come to campus, was a gigantic butterball. I mean, he was as chubby as they get. And after 2 or 3 years in high school of working out with us in the gym, he transformed himself into a pretty big man. Oops.
Ready, Lily?
Now, for the record, I'm still stronger than he is, in case anybody's wondering. But I did hurt myself pretty good a few years ago trying to keep up with him. And so even recently, this has been a really important part of what we do as a family. Since October, I've lost 30 pounds. My wife has lost 40 pounds. Our kids come with us regularly to attend the gym. It's part of our daily activity, and we really enjoy it. And my wife's getting pretty strong too. Now, some of you have actually come and worked out with me. That's pretty impressive. There aren't many women on campus who can actually get 135 up on a regular basis. So we love the university, and we're so excited and so grateful for the opportunity to be a part of such an amazing organization. Now, one of the assignments that we got for this presentation is to work through a case study. And essentially it's, how would the Vice President for Finance assist an academic department in adding a new program, right? And specifically, what support do we provide? What collaborations are needed? What would an overview of this process look like? And what expectations should there be for total funding? Well, to be fair, let me actually walk you through this process for the institution. So what you see here is the first part of the workup that has to be done. Essentially, we have to identify how many students are going to be participating in this program. The assumption being that these are all new students, right? This is new revenue coming to the institution, not a reallocation from some other department. What are the costs per FTE? And I'll show you that calculation in a minute. How many faculty do we need to add? That's our primary cost driver. What is the student-faculty ratio, and what is the actual head count? Now, I'll show you at the end that there are some obvious targets that we need to meet here in order to make this work financially. As we look at costs, salary, wages, and benefits are the primary cost driver. However, there are some current expenses that must be included anytime we add full-time faculty to the roster. We add $2,500 essentially for each faculty member to current expense, and we add $1,000 of travel, right? This provides the department with enough discretionary money to take care of the expenses associated with having additional personnel within their department. So you can see in this example, how the costs escalate till you get to years 4 and 5 when the program has reached maturity and is the size that we expect it to be going forward. Finally, we have to look at revenue. Now, revenue, tuition generated by new FTE, is essentially what we would expect the institution to receive if every single course the FTE student was taking was in this program, right? That's the total amount of revenue that the institution collects. In this example, we don't have other legislative appropriations. We don't have grants. We don't have reallocated funds. We have no other source of funding other than the tuition. Now, in this scenario, we can always count on the tuition. The others are serious question marks, right? Whether or not that type of funding is going to be available. So you're then taking what the cost is and subtracting that from the total revenue to kind of see if you're close to break even. Now, obviously, in this scenario, we have a major problem, right? By time year 5 rolls around, we're operating this program at a $272,000 deficit. Based on the 2 prior screens, can anybody tell me what the primary problem with this model is? You might regret that later. Right, so when you look at the student to faculty ratio, you're looking at 7 or 8 students per faculty member, right? That's too low for this to work financially. So these are the types of things that we're trying to help departments identify as they're considering adding new programs. You have to find the right mix between students and faculty. You have to look at the potential size and the demand for the program to ensure that the expected or anticipated revenue is going to be sufficient to cover the estimated costs. So to answer those questions, right, our office can help the finance managers and the department chairs and the dean work through this. We can help them with estimated revenue, with estimated costs, right? There's a formula for if we add a faculty member and they make so much money, then their, associated benefits are going to be a certain percentage, right? We can help work through all of that. But where the rubber really hits the road on here is, does their model demonstrate that after 5 years, the program is going to be solvent? If it's not, right, then there's still work to be done on the model that they're proposing. And so we act as a check and balance. Now, obviously, the curriculum office and academic leadership are playing a huge role in adopting and implementing these new programs. We're just here to make sure that it all pencils at the end of the day. Additionally, besides that particular exercise, we've been asked to talk about how we would strategically leverage funds. And if you look at the funding sources for the institution, we have appropriated funding, which are the funds that the state gives us, independent from how much revenue we generate through tuition. We also have our tuition dollars. We have institutional allocations, and that's separate but part of appropriated funding, right? This is money that we get from the state that's requested separately from our regular process. These are RFAs, requests for allocations, right? These are special projects that sometimes get funded separately from everything else that's happening within the system and directly with the university. Then you have non-appropriated funding, and that really encompasses everything else. So this is grant funding, this is HERF funding, this is funding from revenue operations like the campus store, dining services, or revenue generating activities within your school. This also includes student and course fees, right? So anything that isn't money from the state and isn't derived through tuition falls into the non-appropriated funding source. Other sources that we might derive in the future are going to be projects like monetizing our real estate, right? We have 200 acres over in Vineyard. We're not going to use 100% of that for UVU academics, right? Some of that's going to be partnerships that will result in revenue. We bought 2 buildings at Thanksgiving Point. We generate rental revenue there. Those funding sources all roll up into non-appropriated funding, but we're looking for new sources, right? We're not just trying to manage our existing sources. So what I would like to do is just walk through our legislative outcomes this year to kind of talk through how we can leverage these funds a little bit better. And if you haven't seen this, this is accurate, clean information from this legislative session. So normally, with compensation, the state funds 75% of the allocation that they give to non-educational units, right? And then we are required as an institution to increase tuition in order to cover the other 25%. So this year, the state awarded 8.75% discretionary funding to all state agencies. Normally, we would get 75% of that and then raise student fees 25 to cover the other 25%. What happened this year that has been a real pain in the neck for all of us? So the personal politics of our governor have interfered with this process significantly, right? He proposed a no tuition increase, and the commissioner's office and the Board of Higher Education gracefully accepted that recommendation. That creates some real challenges for us. Because we don't have a way to raise the other money. So we either, as employees in higher ed, have to take less of an increase than the employees in any other state agency, or we have to go out and find other monies. Now, the state legislature, fortunately, tried to close that gap a little bit, and they provided an additional 12.5%. So we have 87.5% of the 8.75% that the legislature gave us, right? But that leaves us with a hole that's difficult for us to fill. So even though this is going to be the best compensation year in the history of the university, it creates issues for us, right? It's great news that's kind of hard for us. As part of our salary increase, right, every year we have an increase in the cost of our benefits. This year, our dental plan is performing really well, so we won't need to make any changes to our dental plan. But we do need to increase our health plan by 8.6% in order to keep up with inflationary costs. That's actually not that unusual, right? That's pretty typical. But because of the way that they funded us, right, that creates a $647,000 gap in our funding, right? In order for us to hit that 8.6%, we have to do that. Now, we could easily just turn around and pass the increase in benefits onto our employees and raise your premiums, right? Our goal is to avoid doing that, right? We split our premiums 90-10, right? 90% paid by the university, 10% paid by our employees in our standard plan. And we try to maintain that ratio. So we're trying to fill that hole. The funding gap on the salary and wage increase is $3 million, right? So you can see that right off the bat, right, we have a $3.6 million deficit that we're trying to plug in order to make sure that all of us get the same treatment that every other state employee gets. There are a number of initiatives that were funded by the legislature this year. This is what I'm talking about with requests for allocations, right? This is the extra stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the standard funding that the university receives. So we got $500,000 for Native American excellence, $875,000 for civic thought and leadership, and those are ongoing. That's a tremendous award for us. And we're gonna be able to bolster those two programs significantly with that level of funding. We also have USHE initiatives, which have already been allocated to us, but we officially got awarded in this process, and you can see those there. So those are our RFAs in ongoing. When we look at performance-based funding, right, and we look at funding in total from the state, there are really two buckets, right? We have growth funding, and then we have performance-based funding. Did we grow last year? Have we grown since COVID started? So we've been missing out on our growth funding for the last several years as an institution. But we did qualify for 100% of our allocation for performance-based funding. Again, great news, $6.25 million. Additionally, we got one-time funding, $5.4 million plus $1.6 million from Utah and Utah State. Since they didn't meet all of their performance requirements, that gets divided up amongst all of the other institutions. So we're glad when they fell. I mean, seriously, it's really good for us when they mess up. This is getting monkeyed with as well, right? This is great news that's going to be another pain in the neck for us. In the past, we have had 4 performance metrics that the university needed to meet in order to earn 100% of its allocation. This year, they changed that from 4 metrics to 2 metrics. So what that means is that if we don't qualify for those performance metrics at the end of this fiscal year, all of this ongoing funding becomes one-time funding. So if this could potentially all be one-time funding, can we allocate this money on an ongoing basis and add positions and add other expenses that reoccur every single year, right? So what you're going to see in PBA this year is a holding pattern on some of this money. We're gonna hold some of this back and not allocate it this spring because we're gonna wait until next October when we can determine if we've met these new performance measures, and then we'll allocate it out as either ongoing if it qualifies for ongoing funding or as one time. Most likely, we might only have $2 million, maybe $2.5 million of ongoing funding. The rest will be considered one time. So we're gonna have $10 million maybe in one time and a couple $1 million in ongoing. But it's really complicated, right? This process of evaluating the funding, right, isn't just as simple as looking at the bill to see what we've received, right? It's looking at all of the changes that have been implemented, coordinating with the Board of Higher Education and the legislature to fully understand the impact that this is going to have on the institution going forward. We also got one-time funding on our RFAs. This is all, I mean, this was really a fantastic year for the institution in terms of total funding received. There are also system funding opportunities. And what this means is that money is awarded to the system of higher education, and then it gets divided up among institutions that meet some of these requirements. And so on all of these initiatives, we expect to get part of the award. And that remains to be seen, right? We have to wait for the system to work through this process and actually award this. But we will get some of this money as well. So if that was the end of it, we'd be happy. But they did a couple of other things that are super annoying and are really going to change the way that we do business at the institution. First, they passed this carry forward fund policy. So in the past, we could carry forward 7% of our total budget, unrestricted. So what we did as an institution is we would allow all of the VPs to carry forward 4%. Anything that they had in excess of 4% went into the central budget, central contingency for the institution. We did not have to make any commitments to the state or any commitments to the Board of Higher Education regarding how or when we would spend that money. Under the new law, we have to do both of those things. We have to identify how we're going to spend that money and when those funds will be expended. This imposes some pretty significant limitations on how we can use these funds. And so when we're looking at year end and close out, I'll tell you right now, you're going to have your leaders telling you, we want your budget spent down to zero. We want to minimize the amount of carry forward that we're going to take forward. And you're going to see different tactics employed when we do have carry forward. And I'll give you one example. DX presented recently a 5-year plan for all of our software renewals, right? And I'm not talking about just for DX, right? The software that the entire campus uses. When those renewals are going to come due, how much it's going to cost, where the escalation in costs, and what is our deficit in DX going to be because of the increase in costs based on the current projected budgets for DX, right? So when we have leftover money here, right, that's going to go straight into designated projects for DX to pay for this, because we're going to know, we know exactly what we need to do with it and how that money is going to be spent, right? So you're going to see some things change, and the idea that we're just going to allow everybody to carry forward 4%, that dream is dead. I don't know what the new reality is going to look like for sure, but that has to change because of this change in law. They're also proposing an all funds budget, which means every single type of fund that you manage is going to have a budget associated with it that we're reporting back to the state. This is going to be a huge pain in the neck, right? When you talk about your non-appropriated funds, right, having to go through and put together a budget and submit this is going to be a lot of extra work. I'm not sure that it's going to provide the kind of benefit that the legislature is hoping for in terms of accountability, but this is going to be a big administrative lift. So when we talk about managing these types of funds, right, they might be pooled in separate buckets, but they're all connected in the way that we utilize these to improve the institution. When we look at non-appropriated funds, we've done some pretty amazing things, right? When we wanted to start the student center remodel, we're able to retire debt. We were able to basically my mind's gone blank, right? When you redo a loan. Refinance. Okay, thank you. Don't worry, I'm a CPA, I know this stuff. So, all right. So we were able to refinance debt, retire some debt early, and issue $25 million in additional debt, and our annual premiums did not change, which means we were able to maintain the same student fee that we've always had and add a $25 million remodel to the institution. Now, obviously, this extends it out, but the remodel of the building, extends the useful life of that facility significantly, right? And is going to benefit future generations of students. And the idea behind paying debt with student fees that just cover the premiums for that year is that the students that are taking advantage of the facilities that are being funded through debt are paying their portion of that debt and no more. So it worked out really well. And I think you can all agree that the remodel project in the Student Center has been a smashing success, right? So we're constantly looking at these. Another example is with HERF money. Now, the federal government gave us tremendous flexibility with lost revenue, right? We could show how much revenue we lost because of COVID, and that money came to us unrestricted at that point. So we could have used that to backfill and to cover losses and to plug holes and, right, to just cover operations. But we were so efficient and so prepared for the pandemic that we didn't need that money, to basically make payroll, right? We were able to purchase 2 buildings with that. We bought a second building in Thanksgiving Point. We bought the Champions building that DX is going into with money from the federal government, right? So with savvy management of our existing resources, there are opportunities that come up that provide us chances to really expand the footprint of the institution and to do some pretty special things. And obviously, we own tons of property, and at some point, we're going to start developing that property, and that's going to lead to future revenue streams. Hopefully, we're going to be able to bolster our endowment, and we're going to create long-term revenue streams for the institution that are going to benefit essentially all future generations of students that participate at the institution. So, first 6 months. Honestly, these are really busy months for finance, right? And so if I get this job, priority number one is to get through year end, right? We want to close the books. We want to do the budget roll. We want to do our annual reporting to the state. We want to get my position replaced, right? There's not going to be time to change the way that we've done things in the first 6 months. It's going to be about making sure that the transition from Linda, who is an iconic leader at this institution, to, somebody else goes well, right? That's going to be the first 6 months, and for my current staff and for the 6 other individuals that I'll manage if I get Linda's job that I don't currently manage, things are not going to change, right? We're doing really well, and the first priority will be to make sure that we don't miss a step. In terms of my strengths and areas of growth, I've always prided myself about trying to be really direct and honest with people, willing to have the hard conversations and to confront the issues timely and early before they become unmanageable problems. I consider myself to be fair and strategic minded, and I love this university, right? UVU is a part of me, not just because of my experience of working here for 20 years, but because of my care and compassion for the institution. In areas of growth, it was really hard for me to come up with anything. If I'm honest, I have a tendency to procrastinate. I did not start this presentation until 5 o'clock this morning. I am a bit socially introverted, and normally that doesn't really matter, except as a VP, they want me to go to everything. And I'm good, right? It's not like I'm, socially awkward, but it's a lot of work for me, right? Emotionally, it's a lot of work for me to be in big crowds and big groups. And so that's an area that I'm gonna have to grow in to be really good at this job. I have always managed finance. Budget has never been part of my portfolio. So being fully responsible for the appropriated budget on campus will be an area of growth. And then obviously trying to find the right balance and harmony with the other members of campus and figuring out how to provide the service that we need to provide while helping them to feel supported in their initiatives, to make sure that we are cohesive as a leadership group, right? That's new. Right? In my roles up to this point, I've had my kingdom and nobody else messed with it, and that was nice, right? And that's not the way it's going to be as a member of cabinet. I have to have a broader view, and so I have some growth that will need to take place as far as that goes. In closing, what I really want to be known for, at the end of my term here at the institution, is that I was a kind and patient leader. If I can pick on procurement for just a minute. Everybody picks on procurement, so they're used to it. Sometimes I have people call and talk to me and complain about something that's happened. And I'll give you one brief example. It's minor, not a big deal, but we had a department that wanted to buy a time clock for events. Well, clocks are furniture that's not supposed to be purchased on a P card, so our P card auditor flagged it and just said, no, you can't do that, it's a violation. And the department was frustrated because they felt like, well, this isn't furniture, this is a operating tool that we need for an event. We should be able to buy it on P card. And it wasn't a huge deal. Most of the time, the complaints that we receive are not big deals. But sometimes it comes down to just not having enough patience or enough kindness for one another. And what I've learned as I've gotten older is that we are all emotional human beings. And we try to check those emotions, and we try to check our baggage at the door when we come to work, right? But we don't always succeed at that, right? And sometimes the most unpleasant moments that we have are not because the person that is being rude to us hates our guts and thinks lowly of us, but because they're genuinely having a really hard time somewhere else in their life, and that's just bleeding over. A few months ago, my youngest daughter, and she told me I could share this with you in case you're wondering, finally told my wife and I that when she was 12, her friend group, her online friend group, who we thought were just kids in the ward, actually had a 20-year-old man who lived in Canada that would regularly join the conversations and participate. And this man groomed my youngest daughter and talked her into getting naked on camera for him. And it had been weighing heavily on her. That was 2 years ago, right, that this had happened. And I'm a bad dad. I thought that she was just being a snotty teenager. As she gotten older, you know, she was getting more emotional. She was becoming a little more reclusive. I had no idea that she was going through something so hard or something that she felt so much shame for. Now, as an adult, I can look at that and go, you made a mistake. You were manipulated by a much older person. You don't need to feel bad about this. We just need to be safer. But she really internalized what she had done and was really having a hard time with it. And when I found out, right, I was filled with murderous rage towards this man. I talked to our police chief. I wanted to hurt this person as much as I could through the law, legally. But he lives in Canada, and there was nothing that we could do. Except communicate this out to the other members of my daughter's friend group and try and make sure that this didn't happen to anybody else. But that was hard for me. And it consumed a lot of my thought, thought that should have been dedicated to what I was doing while I was here at work. It was consumed by working through that for a little while. And so as we work with one another, as we try to make sure that this institution is running as well as we can, remember that sometimes your toughest customers are just going through something hard. And what they need more than anything is a little patience and a little forgiveness and a little more kindness. And so with that, I'd like to open it up to questions, and feel free to fire away. Obviously, I'm open to talk about anything.
We can get it recorded. Let me bring you the microphone. First, I'd also like to say, Jacob, we appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing that. Would you please let your daughter know that by her courage, it's going to help the rest of us be more sensitive and help prevent that from happening to someone else?
I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, on leveraging our funds, do you see more opportunities to bond, or is the interest rate too high right now for that?
So there are two issues with bonding that really keep us from using that as a viable funding source going forward. One, the interest rates are very high right now. And so the value of bonding has really dropped dramatically. When we refinanced in 2019, had we waited 6 months, it might have been a little better, but we timed that almost perfectly and got rates at 1.75%. On a 20-year note of $25 million and a refinance of another $40 million, right? We saved so much money in interest when we did that it was an absolute slam dunk. And right now, it doesn't pencil nearly as well. Now, if you need the money, and you bond. That's what Utah Tech has done, and right? Sometimes you don't have a choice. We have been very good at maintaining enough flexibility so that when it makes sense and it's really advantageous, we do it, and when it doesn't, we can wait. The other issue that we have with bonding is bonding requires a dedicated revenue stream. So if you don't have something like student fees or parking revenue, if you don't have a dedicated revenue stream, it's difficult to actually get approval to bond. And so we can't bond for anything that we want on campus. There are limited areas of projects that qualify because of that requirement for a dedicated revenue stream. Okay. Oh boy.
Yep. Oh, well, you know the time clock he was talking about? That was my area, right?
You have similar issues. That was actually the event center.
Oh, okay. Because I did buy one a few years ago. So, same ration. Yeah. Oh, Gina, thank you. I do always ask. I try and ask first. Okay, Jacob. So, you did at the beginning, you made a joke about being a Leo. And typically we make jokes to deflect or to, not to deflect, but kind of humorously address things that we may or may not be concerned about. And so I am curious about, you know, the putting in there that you can come across as haughty, but lovable. And I'm not saying I disagree or agree with that, but I did notice in your presentation, you talked about during the first 6 months, the things that you were going to focus on and do. And they were all task oriented in regards to the position itself and what the budget and finance area needs to accomplish. And so that in combination with the joke does cause me to pause and wonder, how do you view yourself in coming into this new VP role and how it's going to affect the people in this division and then across campus as well?
That's a good question. So I mentioned this earlier, right? Moving from the AVP to the VP means that I add 6 full-timers to my portfolio. And so as far as the division goes, you know, since we merged with Linda and we've done things together, our divisional meetings are joint. Linda and I get up, we both speak, we both present, we both go around and meet with our employees and tell them how much we appreciate them. And so I may be speaking out of turn and making a false assumption here, but the people in my division know that I care about them, that I want to know who they are, that I want to understand what's going on in their areas. And I think they're probably pretty comfortable with the idea that that same level of care and compassion will continue with me as the vice president. As far as with the rest of campus, so my relationship with student affairs is long and exciting. But what would you say is your impression of working with me?
He asked.
He did ask. He
Yeah,
did
so
ask.
so fire away. Total honesty here.
Okay. Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Okay. I will say that in my past experiences with, I would agree that you are introverted, and understanding that does help the perception with it. Like that you do better in a one-on-one setting rather than a group setting. One thing that I have noticed in my time in working with you, I've been audited several times, for the record. Thank you, Jacob. I love auditors, by the way. So, but we have a long history in working together. But one thing I have noticed is that you do tend to surround yourself with men, and you seek men's approval and their perspective and advice. And there aren't a lot of women or persons of color in the area or in meetings where people need to be present and give perspective and advice. And that is a question I do ask. Even in the presentation at the beginning, you spoke about, you know, what women at UVU are capable of. And your focus was on your wife, obviously, but it sits in the back of the head. Like, as a cabinet member and as a VP, is there that lens of inclusivity and a focus on helping women in the workplace be valued and have their perspective appreciated?
very fair. So let me just start by saying there are not a lot of women in the accounting industry, right? And my staff can attest, when we post our positions, we don't have very many females that apply. And that makes it difficult to really have a good mix between men and women in some of our positions. The other thing that I would say is, in terms of my own staff, I've had very little turnover. In the last 6 years that I've been in this position, I've only had turnover in dining services. So there haven't been a lot of opportunities to diversify through hiring practices, the mix of men and women on my staff. But I will consciously say that is probably an area that I can do better. Not that I would say that I'm, discriminate in any way, but in helping the entire division to recognize the need for a better balance within our division between men and women, and particularly in senior leadership.
Marisa, thank you for a candid question. Jacob, thank you for a candid answer. Other questions? I can actually come to the other side of the room.
By the way, we're probably going to be back there to audit soon.
Retaliation. So I want to piggyback a little bit off of what Marisa said. We've talked all the time, and I still am bad at names. I'm so sorry. I want to piggyback off of a little bit what she's saying, because all three candidates for this position are men, and we women, the few of us that are in the division, notice this, and so the worry is, are we going to be seen? Is it going to be status quo? Are we going to always just kind of be ignored? And, I think there's maybe some emphasis in this with the university on hiring with diversity inclusion, but I don't know how much emphasis there is on those of us who've been here a long time. Are we seen? Are we valuable? And I think that when the leadership changed, when Linda came in, a lot of us kind of cheered, and we said, a lot of women said, oh, wonderful, she's so good at mentoring, women, and what a great opportunity for us. But it was short-lived. And so we're kind of back to, oh, rats, like, do we matter? And so I just kind of was wondering, this is like a long rambling part of this question, but what would you do differently? What would you do same as what Linda has been doing? I mean, the first 6 months, would be business as usual, but what would that look like for the business as usual, where, there are some of us that maybe don't feel like we matter? Or, are you going to change things? Are you going to kind of do a lot of mentoring like Linda did? And then what happens after the 6 months?
Okay. So a number of the initiatives that have been started both by the university and by Linda will continue, right? We're encouraging employees to participate in foundations of inclusion. We have the diversity and equity committee that we've created, and that work is going to go forward. Like you've seen in our divisional meetings that you've participated in the past, there will continue to be an emphasis on that. As far as personal mentoring, I don't know what Linda has been doing with individual employees, but that's incredibly valuable. And part of that onus is going to be on members of the division to reach out and to seek those opportunities. If not from me, from other leaders within the division. I think we have a kind and compassionate staff that want to help people succeed. We want to maintain and to expand the sense of belonging that we've talked about so often during this last year. It's a process, right? And I know that maybe not as much in the auxiliaries, but in our business fields, that the men to women ratio is pretty high, and there's room for improvement there, and part of that is developing our internal staff members, helping them to see the importance of continuing their education, to expanding their credentials, to being qualified for some of these senior leadership positions. When we're talking about finance, a CPA license is required for most of these positions, right? And so, part of what we want to do is help create flexible schedules and a supportive work environment so that our employees can continue to pursue advanced credentials, to make them qualified to continue to move up within the organization. And so I would like to work very hard to change that perception within our division, and clearly it's going to require some more intentional effort than what we've put forward in the past in order to make that a reality going forward.
Will the gaps that the legislature is causing cause you to work more closely with IA in the position? Will it reprioritize the priorities that they have for the Evergreen campaign? Or kind of what will we do in terms of fundraising to help cover some of those gaps?
So when we talk about gaps in funding from the legislature, it's really difficult to plug those holes with donated funds. If we had a massive endowment and we could count on earnings on an annual basis, right, essentially ongoing revenue, then we could consider doing something like that. The problem with us is our endowment's only $50 million, right? So it's not generating enough interest to meet all of its needs as currently constituted. So they don't have ongoing money. So if we were going to try and close any of those gaps with donated funds, it'd have to be donated every single year. And so that's really not a viable option for us. And really, if they could raise more money, we would want that to go into the endowment to bolster that, so that at some point in the future, we might have that flexibility. As we try to plug these holes, we're going to do that internally by reallocating institutional funds, looking at contingency pools, looking at just hard reallocations. One of the realities that we have to face is our enrollment's been flat, and in some areas it's been declining, right? And well, as enrollment declines, there's a natural need to potentially reduce budget in those areas. That reduced budget could potentially be reallocated to plug some of these holes. And so we'll be creative, and part of what Linda is going to do before she retires is get that one last plan ready and present it to campus. And then she'll hand the reins off from there. No, we have maintained a strong contingency for many years, and the last couple of years that's taken a hit. But I think we're going to be able to manage it this year as well.
Jacob, I actually want to follow up on that question. I love accountability as a business professor. It's one of the things that I teach quite a bit. And so I think I understand where the legislature is coming from on looking for the transparency across the range of funding sources. But I've also been involved in the political process for long enough that I know that my fear is that the legislature is going to see these different pots of funding and say, well, it's being taken care of by the endowment, or it's been taken care of by these other things, therefore we can cut appropriated funds. Is there a proactive method by members of USHE to inform and educate the legislature that they don't cut their own feet off, if you will?
It's been better than it is right now. We don't have strong leadership at the commissioner's office. We have an entirely brand new board of higher education. We're not getting strong central leadership. And so that is a valid concern. Now, in an all-fund budget, you're not just talking about how much revenue you have, but you're trying to identify the expenses associated with that revenue. So if your budgets are clean and accurate, the legislature and certainly the fiscal analysts should be able to look at that and come to the natural conclusion that cutting appropriated funds would severely hamstring our ability to continue to fulfill our mission. So I'm not as worried about that. I think this is more a transparency and accountability measure as it is a revenue or cost-cutting measure by the legislature. But the real issue, in my opinion, is the lack of leadership centrally. That is causing us a lot of problems. The governor claims that when he said no increase in tuition, he never extended that to no increase in student fees. The student fee idea was proposed by the commissioner's office and by the Board of Higher Education. So it's really a significant self-inflicted wound, right? That wasn't being asked for by the legislature, and it wasn't being asked for by the governor's office. These are the kinds of issues that happen when you don't have strong leadership. And so, you know, when I'm looking at where we need help centrally in order to maintain better relationships with the legislature and the governor's office.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
I want to respond to the things about the women and what you said, because I do work in the business office and I see we in the business school, and we try to hire women. We try really hard to hire women, and other schools take them and they have more opportunities. So if we want to grow women in UVU, we have to do it in UVU, and we have to be willing to do it, because I see the men working really hard to bring women in. So I had to follow up because the other two candidates did say their first 6 months would be listening tours. From my position, I appreciate that your first 6 months would not be a listening tour and we would clear out the year end and things. Would there be a time that you would plan to do a listening tour, or would you, because some of us kind of get that in the quarterly meetings, those that don't have the quarterly meetings, would you give that to them?
Honestly, I haven't planned on doing an extensive listening tour. I've been here for a long time. I kind of know, you know, what's bothering people and what's not. You know, there are opportunities maybe for getting some better feedback, particularly from members of our division. And by some extension. But the idea that I need to go out and I need to listen to everybody talk about what's going on, like an external candidate would, you know, really isn't going to be a good use of anyone's time, because 90% of what they're going to say, I'm already going to know. And so maybe a more surgical approach to trying to solicit some of that feedback might be in order.
Thank you, Jacob. We have time for one last question.
Awesome, thank you. For finishing your presentation at 5 a.m., it was amazing. The only thing that worries me is I didn't see Kyle Reyes at all. He's not here, so we'll keep it a secret, I think. So my question, Jacob, is you've been here for 20 years. The amount of change here at UVU has been exponential. I've been here for less than 2 years, and we've opened like, 3-4 new buildings. It's crazy. So how will you continue to adapt, seeing how UVU is changing as much as it is almost on the daily? New buildings, new budgets, less students, more students, you know, whatever might happen.
All right, so first I want to address the Kyle thing. So we started the same year, and it's always kind of irritated me that he's always made it to the next level faster than I have. Right? He was a director first, he was an AVP first, he was a vice president first. It's super annoying. And so, you know, like in politics, right, you never give face time to your opponent, right? So I intentionally left him out because that dude gets enough credit and attention, you know. Anyway, no, I'm very fond of Kyle, and he's a strong supporter of mine, and we've become good friends over the years. As far as adapting to the ever-changing environment at the institution, 20 years of dealing with incredible growth has forced all of us who have been here for a long time to learn how to adapt to change on the fly, right? You know, with rare exception, we get bigger, we're asked to do more with either the same amount of resources or an incrementally smaller proportion of increase compared to what we've been asked to do. Yeah, you know, anybody that's been here more than 5 years, has that been your experience? Right? We all have to face that reality. And one of the things that makes UVU so great is that we are lean and green. We don't waste money. We don't waste our time. We do it more efficiently and more effectively than the University of Utah, and way more efficiently than Utah State, right? We're the model for efficient distribution of education. And honestly, we should get more credit at the legislature for the job that we do with the resources that we're given. So specifically to answer your question, we'll do that as a team. With me and my team as we talk about our own internal issues, and with me and cabinet as we talk about the issues that are facing the institution. The whole entire PBA process is about trying to find the most important priorities and to scrounge up enough money to take care of those most important priorities every single year, right? And that's what we do. Have we ever had a year when we got to do everything that we wanted to? I mean, not even close. I mean, the millions of dollars of PBA requests that come in every year is kind of a testament to all of the needs that we have on campus that aren't going to be funded this year, next year, or maybe ever, right? And so, yes, with difficulty, we will adjust and adapt, but at the same time, I love it because it is what makes us so great as an institution. Thank you very much.
Grateful for everybody coming. I do want to remind you of the survey link. Please fill that out. I am compiling a report that goes back to the president this week, and your input will be very helpful. But I want to address something else. I do a lot of executive leadership training, and we saw something really remarkable this morning in the conversations that we had. We talked about two critical issues. One was the safety of our children and sexual assault and sexual abuse, which is a very important issue, just addressed by the legislature recently. And we also had a wonderful conversation. We hide behind this term of diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, but actually what we're talking about is speaking with respect for each other and elevating the quality of our conversation. And when I do executive leadership training here in Utah, one of the challenges that we have is that in Utah, we tend to avoid conflict. And I think that there's a variety of reasons for that. But in our desire to avoid contention, we sometimes don't have the hard conversations. And it was wonderful to have an open, hard conversation about really key issues that helped to open the doors. We spoke of women's participation today in leadership roles and in finance and accounting. I personally, as a guy, don't know why anyone would go into finance and accounting, but and hopefully having the conversations about women also opens up the doors to other conversations about bringing forward the amazing talents of everyone that we have, because it makes us all better. It takes courage to have those conversations. I'm grateful for Marisa having the courage of speaking up, and Susan and you as well. I can guarantee on the search committee, having Marisa and others, we have had these very open, hard conversations on the search committee. We do encourage you to please encourage your friends to step forward and apply. That can be one of the challenges that we have. But thank you to all of you for being supportive and participating. Thank you for creating the space for such a critical conversation. These are important topics, and we need to have more healthy conversations like this. So thank you to all of you, and thank you, Jacob.